The most famous bubble never actually happened. It was invented 200 years later by a Scottish journalist. He used comedy cartoons as historical evidence. Everything you think you know about the first financial bubble is a myth. And the real story is far more interesting. London, 1841. The streets smell of coal smoke and printer ink. Newspapers stack on every corner and horse hooves clatter on wet cobblestones. A Scottish journalist named Charles Mackay works late in his study, surrounded by stacks of old pamphlets and dusty leather-bound manuscripts. He is collecting stories about human foolishness. Mackay believes crowds of people are easily swept away by madness. He is writing a book to prove it. The book will cover alchemy, witch trials, the Crusades, and strange obsessions that grip entire nations. 3 chapters are reserved for financial bubbles: the Mississippi Scheme, the South Sea Bubble, and the Tulip Mania of Holland. For the Tulip chapter, Mackay draws on pamphlets printed in the 1600s. The pamphlets are full of cartoons and poems mocking greedy tulip buyers. They show monkeys in suits trading flowers. They tell jokes about sailors eating rare bulbs by mistake. These pamphlets were written as moral satire. They were meant to be funny, not factual. But Mackay rewrites the jokes into serious prose, and presents the whole thing as a true account of national madness. No one checks his sources. The book will become the most cited work on financial madness for the next 2 centuries. The book was published in 1841 and was an immediate success. Readers loved the Tulip chapter most of all. It had everything people wanted from a cautionary tale. Greedy fools. Exotic flowers. Fortunes made and lost in weeks. A whole country losing its mind over something beautiful and useless. Mackay wrote that all levels of Dutch society joined the madness. Weavers sold their looms to buy bulbs. Servants invested their life savings. Fishermen left their boats. Chimney sweeps traded on street corners. The price of a single rare bulb could buy a house on a canal, or 12 acres of farmland, or a lifetime of comfortable living. Foreigners poured money into Holland from across Europe. Everyone expected prices to keep rising forever. The tulip trade became the center of the national economy. Taverns turned into trading floors. People signed contracts for bulbs still in the ground, trading paper promises like money. Futures contracts are agreements to buy or sell something at a fixed price on a future date, before the item even exists. The story spread far beyond the book. Newspapers repeated it. Teachers taught it. Politicians used it as a warning. It became the default example of what happens when a crowd loses its reason. For more than 150 years, almost no one questioned whether any of it was true. But no one knew how fast it would all fall apart. Then in 1989, an economist named Peter Garber decided to check the actual records. He found sales data for 161 bulbs across 36 varieties. The numbers told a very different story from Mackay's book. Most rare bulbs had been expensive for years, long before the so-called mania. The truly wild price spikes lasted only a few weeks and involved only the cheapest, most common bulb varieties. The famous peak prices came mostly from a single charity auction in the town of Alkmaar, held to benefit the children of a dead tulip dealer. Later, a historian named in Goldgar dug deeper. She could find only about 350 people involved in the tulip trade in the entire Dutch Republic. Almost all of them were wealthy merchants and skilled craftsmen who could easily afford to lose the money. They were a tight-knit social group, many related by family or religion. The human fates were nothing like the myth. A wealthy merchant from Amsterdam lost a few hundred guilders and went back to his regular business the next season. A Dutch satirist wrote funny poems about greedy tulip buyers, never expecting his jokes would be read as history 2 centuries later. And Charles Mackay himself became a respected author and lecturer, his reputation built on a story that was never true. Goldgar could not find a single person who went bankrupt because of tulips. The Dutch economy was completely unaffected. The Cambridge Economic History of Europe does not even mention the event. Mackay had turned a small hobby among wealthy collectors into a national catastrophe. But the strangest part was not the crash itself. The strangest part is that the myth survived and thrived for almost 200 years despite being wrong. And it is still alive today. Every time there is a financial bubble, someone brings up Tulip Mania. It is taught in every economics class. It is cited by politicians, by investors, by journalists as the classic example of crowd madness. It is the default story people tell when they want to say this time is no different from all the other times people went crazy. The myth survives because it tells people what they want to hear. It makes them feel smart. If the Dutch were all fools back then, we can be the wise ones now. We can look back and laugh at how stupid everyone was, and never notice that we might be doing the exact same thing with whatever the latest fashionable investment happens to be. The real Tulip Mania is not the one in 1637. The real Tulip Mania is the 2 centuries of people repeating a story they never checked. The real madness of crowds is believing that everyone else is mad except you. And that is the delusion Mackay book accidentally feeds, even as it pretends to warn against delusion. Good stories spread faster than facts. A simple moral about greed and ruin travels farther than a complicated truth about a small market among rich people. Human nature has not changed in 400 years. Just not in the way Charles Mackay thought. And that is not even the most ironic part. The most ironic part is this. Charles Mackay wrote an entire book about how people believe stupid things without checking. He spent chapters exposing popular delusions and the madness of crowds. And his single most famous story, the one everyone remembers, is itself a popular delusion. The man who spent his career debunking myths created the most enduring myth about financial bubbles. 200 years later, it is still the first example almost anyone gives when they talk about market madness. Next, the story of a man who did see a bubble coming and got out at the perfect time, not because he was smarter than everyone else but because a complete stranger gave him a tip he could not ignore.